Ladies and gentlemen, picture yourself on a bustling airport concourse where tensions flare and destinies collide, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. A simple suitcase, a single interaction, and one unforgettable moment reveal the deeply rooted prejudices still lurking beneath society's veneer. Brace yourself for a roller coaster of drama and redemption, complete TPYH private phone calls, high-stakes boardrooms, and a shocking reveal that transforms a routine flight into an unforgettable lesson in humility. Today we delve into the story of a flight attendant whose arrogant dismissal triggers a chain reaction bigger than she ever imagined. Welcome aboard. You won't believe how this flight ends. The day began at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the world's busiest airport, humming with travelers from every corner of the globe. People bustled through the corridors, rolling carry-ons behind them, calling out to family members, or juggling overpriced coffees and boarding passes. Flight announcements echoed overhead, mentioning delays, gate changes, and last calls. In the middle of this lively chaos stood Thomas Ellington, a successful but unassuming businessman. Thomas was a tall black man in his early 40s with a gentle sat and an understated air of confidence. He wasn't wearing a bespoke suit or brandishing designer luggage, though he could certainly afford it. Instead, he wore comfortable travel attire, dark jeans, a well-fitted sweater, and a sturdy pair of boots. The only thing that could hint at his social or economic standing was the watch on his wrist, a Rolex Submariner, subtle but undeniable in its authenticity. Yet few people noticed. After all, in a place like Hartsfield-Jackson, both millionaires and college students hustle side by side, their stories often hidden behind hurried footsteps. Thomas was making his way to Gate F-12 for a flight bound for New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, then onwards to London for an important business deal. He had a small but influential stake in the leasing contracts of various aircraft models, including some used by the airline he was flying with. If one were to look at the official documents, they'd see his signature or that of his holding company. But hardly anyone ever bothered to check such details. To flight attendants, gate agents, or even the average passenger, Thomas was just another traveler, tired, impatient to board, and grateful just to have a seat. Waiting at the gate, Thomas sipped water from his reusable bottle. He thought about what lay ahead. Major negotiations in London regarding an Airbus A330 lease extension for an airline that was facing financial trouble. He'd done this dance many times, traveling under the radar, to finalize deals that could alter the fortunes of entire companies. But no one at Gate F-12 had any idea of his silent importance, nor did Thomas expect special treatment. He loved being incognito, blending with the crowd, and letting people reveal their true character before they realized who he was. On board the Boeing 737, headed to JFK. Cynthia Barnes, a senior flight attendant, was making last-minute preparations before boarding. Cynthia prided herself on a no-nonsense approach. She believed that efficiency was king, and that passengers often needed a firm hand to keep them from causing delays or drama. She was known among her peers as someone who could be stern. Yet behind closed doors, her co-workers occasionally described her as having borderline hostility. Hostility towards certain passengers, especially those she deemed unrefined or difficult. Unfortunately, her biases showed most prominently when dealing with people of color. Over the course of her decade-long career, Cynthia had managed to avoid major controversies. She possessed just enough charm to keep negative reviews from going too far. Sometimes rumors circulated about her rude behavior, but these never escalated to official complaints, probably because many travelers, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, chose to move on rather than endure the bureaucratic hassle of lodging a formal grievance. Others would get partial apologies from Cynthia if they caught her in a calmer moment. But a lingering question remained. How long before her behavior collided with tech? Wrong passenger, on the wrong day, in the wrong set of circumstances. When the gate agent announced the start of boarding for Flight 407, the small lounge area filled with an immediate bustling energy. Families were gathering their belongings. Business travelers, tapped away at phones or laptops, and exhausted holiday-goers held pillows and plush blankets close to their chests. Thomas hung back, waiting for his group number, Zone 2, to be called. He had a seat in the first few rows of the main cabin, not in business or first class, because he liked to see how the airline's service was for ordinary passengers. The line inched forward. A few minutes later, Thomas presented his boarding pass and stepped onto the jet bridge. It was a well-worn metal tunnel that smelled of stale air, airplane fuel, and the promise of new adventures. Inside, he found a flight attendant at the door, a younger woman named Karen Wu, who greeted every passenger with a warm smile and a friendly welcome aboard. She was the junior flight attendant, assigned to work alongside Cynthia. Karen greeted Thomas with genuine warmth. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome aboard." Thomas nodded and smiled, tipping his baseball cap in polite acknowledgement. He proceeded down the aisle, scanning the row numbers for his seat 8C, an aisle seat. To his right, near the forward galley, he spotted Cynthia Barnes, who was chatting animatedly with another passenger who was struggling to put a large carry-on into the overhead bin. Cynthia had that forced smile on her face, the one that said, "I have to be polite because I'm on the clock," and you could feel she was losing patience by the second. Thomas, being tall, felt cramped in the narrow aisle. He tried to shuffle to the side to let a family with small kids pass. As they did, one of the kids accidentally bumped Thomas's arm. Thomas smiled reassuringly at the flustered mother, letting her know it was no problem. She mouthed a thank you and continued to the back of the plane. Finally reaching his seat, Thomas tried to find space in the overhead bin for his carry-on. Airlines often advertise one carry-on, one personal item, but they rarely mention the Tetris-like skill needed to stow that carry-on in a jam-packed overhead bin. A few seats away, he spotted an empty space that would fit his roller bag. He hoisted it up and slid it in, neatly beside another small duffel bag. Right then Cynthia appeared. "Sir, can you move that short bag so we can fit others?" Her tone was abrupt, almost scolding. Thomas looked at her with raised eyebrows. Before he could reply, she muttered, "People always bring these huge suitcases and claim they're carry-ons. I swear." Thomas didn't want to start an argument. Politely, he pointed out that the bag was standard carry-on size and fit into the bin just fine. Cynthia gave him a tight-lipped smile, her eyes flicking over him in an appraising, dismissive way. "We'll see about that," she said. Thomas took his seat without further comment, thinking it was just a random bit of rudeness, something many travelers endure. He pulled out the airline magazine and started thumbing through it, trying to focus on an article about upcoming routes to Asia. Little did he know that this initial tense exchange was just the tip of the iceberg. As more passengers boarded, the overhead bins filled rapidly. A young couple was trying to cram another suitcase into the overhead above Thomas. When it became clear that no more bags could fit there, Cynthia swooped in her frustration growing. She shot a glare at Thomas's roller bag as if it were the root cause of all her boarding woes. Cynthia turned to Thomas. Sir Yuo might have to check Tut bag. It's too big, she insisted. Thomas calmly explained that it was Tay standard carry-on size and that he travelled with it all the time, with no issues, often noted this exact airline. He even offered to show her the bag dimensions on his phone, where he had a screenshot of the airline's official carry-on size policy just in case. He'd learned from experience that some flight attendants appreciated Tut gesture, but Cynthia, arms crossed, was not in a listening mood. Don't get smart with me, she snapped. I said you have to check it. We don't have space for oversized bags. A few heads turned. Passengers nearby sensed the tension. One older gentleman in the row behind Thomas removed his headphones to watch the exchange. Thomas kept a steady tone. Ma'am, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying it fits your size limits. If overhead space is a concern, I'm happy to put it in another bin a bit further down, or Yuo can see for yourself it's not oversized. Cynthia let out an exasperated sigh. Look, I have 180 passengers to board, and you're holding everyone up. Either you gate check it, or we'll have an issue here. She was speaking louder now, enough for other passengers to hear clearly. A hush fell in the surrounding rows. Thomas knew his rights as a passenger, but he also knew that flight attendants held a significant amount of immediate authority. You could comply now and sort out the injustice later, or risk being removed from the flight. And he truly needed to get to London in time for the next day's negotiations. So he smiled politely, though with a hint of disappointment, and said, All right, I'll step off to check it quickly, if that's what's best. Cynthia just nodded curtly, already, turning to help another passenger. Thomas sighed, unlatched the overhead bin, and prepared to retrieve his bag to take it to the front of the aircraft for gate check. Before he could fully pull it down, however, Karen Wu, the junior flight attendant, appeared. Sir, is everything okay? She asked, looking concerned. She had witnessed part of the exchange. Thomas forced a polite smile. Yes, everything's fine, thank you. I'm just going to gate check this bag. Karen frowned, noticing that the bag seemed well within size limits. She seemed to want to say something, but with Cynthia so close by, and clearly irritated, Karen probably decided not to ruffle any feathers. She stepped aside and let Thomas pass, offering a small, apologetic nod as he went. Thomas stepped off the plane briefly, handing his carry-on to a gate agent. I'm sorry you have to do that, the agent said. Looks like it should fit. It's okay, Thomas replied with a shrug. I just need to make my connecting flight. He walked back onto the aircraft, hoping to settle into his seat without further drama. He had no idea that Cynthia had continued to seethe. She resented that Thomas had politely but firmly questioned her authority. In her mind, that made him one of those passengers entitled uppity, and no better than any of the rule breakers who tried to get away with something. The truth was, Thomas hadn't broken any rule, but Cynthia's worldview was skewed by her biases and her stressful day. When Thomas returned to his seat, he found Cynthia rummaging through the overhead bin above him. She was pulling out an unclaimed black duffel bag. For a moment, Thomas thought she might be rearranging luggage to make space for another passenger. Instead, she marched past him down the aisle. Intrigued, Thomas turned to glance behind him. He caught a glimpse of her, stopping at the forward galley, dropping the duffel bag into a trash bag that the crew often used for collected waste. Surely this must be someone's bag, Thomas thought. Why on earth was she placing it in the trash? He stood halfway up, leaning into the aisle concerned. Could she have mistaken it for a bag of garbage? That seemed bizarre. Most people know the difference between a passenger's bag and literal trash. Maybe she was temporarily placing it there to move items around. But the sight of a passenger bag going into a large plastic trash sack made no sense. Thomas politely asked, "Excuse me, Miss Barnes. Whose bag is that?" He made sure to keep his voice calm, though curiosity and a bit of disbelief laced his tone. Cynthia turned sharply. "It's a bag that's not allowed on board," she replied. "Don't worry about it." Thomas frowned. "It looks like a passenger's personal item." She shrugged. "It was left behind, probably belonged to someone who moved seats. It was just taking up space." At that moment, another passenger, an older black woman in the row across from Thomas, caught his eye. She gave him a questioning look that said, "What on earth is happening?" Thomas could only shake his head slightly, returning her perplexed expression. One might assume that Cynthia, in her frustration, had singled out someone else's bag, or even that she suspected it to be a security risk. But it was such a strange action, throwing it into a trash bag, rather than taking it to the jet bridge or handing it off to the gate agent. Thomas pondered whether he should intervene. He wasn't entirely sure this was a racial or personal bias yet. But the manner in which Cynthia had singled out his bag for checking and then swiftly disposed of another bag belonging to an unknown passenger raised alarm bells. Did the duffel bag belong to a fellow black passenger? Or was Cynthia simply venting her anger by punishing any bag she found questionable? Nevertheless, passengers were still boarding, so Thomas decided to remain calm and see how the situation unfolded. He pressed himself into his seat to let a late boarding passenger slip by. Takeoff was relatively smooth. The Boeing 737 soared into the cloudy sky, leaving Atlanta behind. Thomas tried to relax, listening to a podcast about international business trends. Occasionally, the older black woman across the aisle eyed him clearly, still unsettled by the earlier confrontation. She seemed hesitant about whether she should say something. Ultimately, the flight attendants began beverage service, which provided a temporary distraction. Somewhere over the Carolinas, the flight encountered slight turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and Cynthia and Karen stowed their service carts. Cynthia passed by Thomas's row, offering him a perfunctory glance. He quietly asked for a glass of water, to which she responded with a clipped nod. Nothing more. Finally, about 30 minutes later, the seatbelt sign turned off. Some passengers got up to use the lavatory. Others continued watching in-flight entertainment or working on laptops. Thomas was reading a business report on his tablet when an unsettled voice came from behind him. "That's my bag." "Where is it?" A tall black man with braided hair demanded, speaking to no one in particular, as he rummaged through the overhead bin. He was searching for a black duffel bag. Thomas's heart sank. It had to be the bag that Cynthia had thrown into the trash bag. He watched the man frantically open and close every overhead compartment in the vicinity. The passenger's name, Thomas would later learn, was DeAndre Milton. "Has anyone seen a black duffel bag with a silver zipper?" DeAndre asked, voice cracking with frustration. A few passengers murmured negative replies. Some looked away awkwardly, unsure how to help. He pressed the flight attendant call button. Karen Wu arrived first. "I can't find my bag." "It was right here," DeAndre said, pointing to the overhead compartment. "I put it in before takeoff, and now it's gone." Karen looked genuinely concerned. "Did you maybe move seats or switch compartments?" "No, I was in 9A all along," DeAndre insisted. Karen, a bit flustered, tugged at her uniform. "Let me check with the other flight attendants, sir. Please try to remain calm." As Karen turned to go forward, Cynthia, noticing the commotion, strode down the aisle. Her gaze flicked from DeAndre's exasperated face to the overhead bin. "Is there a problem here?" Yes, there is, DeAndre replied, anger creeping into his voice. My bag's gone. Cynthia's expression hardened, as though she recalled exactly what had happened. She crossed her arms. Was it a large black duffel bag? She asked, her tone oddly accusatory. Yes, it was a black duffel with a silver zipper, DeAndre reiterated. What happened to it? Cynthia hesitated for a heartbeat, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. Then she stiffened. It was untagged and oversized. We had to remove it from the overhead bin. You should have checked it at the gate. Thomas, listening from his seat, felt a twist in his gut. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Cynthia continued. I'll see what we can do once we land. But for now, please take your seat. Wait. I want to know where my bag is, DeAndre insisted. I have my laptop in there, personal documents, a birthday gift for my mother. Cynthia cut him off. I understand your frustration, sir, but you're causing a disruption. Please sit down. Passengers around them fell silent. It was tense, and eyes darted between DeAndre and Cynthia. Sensing a potential escalation, Thomas decided he could no longer stay out of it. He stood, stepping into the aisle carefully. Pardon me, he said softly, looking first at DeAndre, then Cynthia. I believe I saw Ms. Barnes disposing of a bag in the front galley earlier. He kept his voice even, trying not to sound accusatory. DeAndre looked at him, confusion and anger in his eyes. Disposing of my bag. Are you, serious? Thomas nodded. I saw her put it into a large trash bag. An incredulous gasp spread among nearby passengers. Cynthia glared at Thomas with a mixture of disdain and panic. That's a very serious accusation. I was only following protocol, she snapped. Thomas held up a hand. I'm just sharing what I saw. I don't mean to cause a problem, but this man's bag seems to have disappeared, and it might be the same one. That's theft, DeAndre exclaimed, clearly distressed. In a moment that felt surreal, Cynthia tried to brush it off. We sometimes dispose of unclaimed items that pose a risk. We can't be responsible for every piece of luggage that people abandon. How was I supposed to know it belonged to him? She was raising her voice, and passengers began pulling out their phones, some of them no doubt filming. Abandoned. DeAndre shot back, voice shaking. I put it in the overhead bin above my seat. That's not abandoned, Karen Wu, who had been quietly observing, jumped in. Let's check the galley, Cynthia. Maybe we can retrieve the bag. Cynthia paused, swallowing as if regretting her actions. Fine, she said through clenched teeth. The tension was palpable. Thomas stepped back to let them pass. He could see the fury and confusion on DeAndre's face, and a sense of dread sank in his stomach. He wondered how far Cynthia would go to maintain her veneer of authority. Minutes passed, but it felt like an eternity to DeAndre. He remained standing near his seat, arms folded tightly, his mind racing with the worst possible scenarios. Personal data compromised, expensive electronics lost, and a humiliating sense of having been singled out. Meanwhile, passengers whispered among themselves. Finally, Karen returned, her face grim. I found it, she said, holding the duffel bag out to DeAndre. He quickly unzipped it to check if everything was still there. His MacBook, an iPad, paperwork, a small box with a watch for his mother's birthday gift. Thankfully, nothing seemed damaged at first glance. Cynthia trailed behind, arms crossed, eyes smoldering. She offered no apology. Instead, she said, I hope in the future you'll follow the airline's carry-on policies more carefully. At that, DeAndre's patience snapped. Your airline policies don't involve throwing people's personal belongings in the trash. This is absolutely unacceptable. I'm filing a complaint the minute we land." Thomas gently touched DeAndre's arm to calm him. "You have every right to be upset," he said, "but keep your cool. We'll sort this out." Cynthia looked at Thomas. "You stay out of this," she hissed, her face turning red. "Your attitude about your own hair started all this mess." Thomas felt the sting of her words. He also felt the gaze of the older black woman from across the aisle, an unspoken question in her eyes. "Is this really happening?" The hush among the passengers was thick with disbelief. "Please, ma'am," Thomas said evenly. "I have no interest in causing problems, but throwing someone's belongings in the trash, that's beyond reason." Cynthia rolled her eyes. "I told you we thought it was abandoned." "That's the end of it." DeAndre's voice quivered with anger. "It wasn't abandoned. This is racist, plain and simple." Cynthia's face hardened, a mix of fear and indignation. "Excuse me, don't you dare accuse me of racism. If it was racist, I'd have thrown your bag off the plane, not just in the trash bag. Let's not escalate this further." A gasp rippled among the passengers, who heard Tut remark. Even Karen looked appalled. Thomas felt his heart rate quicken. In that moment, the entire situation took on a clarity that was impossible to ignore. Cynthia's bias was glaring. Her words had soared past the boundaries of decency, exposing a hatred or prejudice she could no longer conceal. The rest of the flight was an exercise in strained silence. Cynthia retreated to the galley, avoiding eye contact. Karen made quiet rounds, trying to restore some semblance of normalcy by offering beverages with an apologetic smile. DeAndre returned to his seat, hugging his recovered duffel bag, as though it might disappear again. Thomas remained in seat 8C, a swirl of emotions inside him. As the plane began its descent into JFK, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at John F. Kennedy International Airport shortly. Flight attendants prepare the cabin for arrival." Cynthia's voice was taut, all traces of the earlier confrontation absent from her professional tone. Thomas's phone buzzed. He read a text from an airline executive he'd been meeting in London. The negotiation was crucial, but now something else tugged at Thomas, the desire to see justice served for DeAndre and for everyone who had been subjected to Cynthia's behavior. He recalled that in his capacity as a minority stakeholder in the airline's leasing contracts, he had more power than Cynthia could ever imagine. He had intentionally never flaunted his connections. He preferred that people treat him as an ordinary passenger so he could observe the airline's operations from ground level. But this incident had crossed a line. If Cynthia was comfortable showing such blatant disregard for a passenger going so far as to trash someone's belongings, Thomas shuddered to think of how she might have mistreated people when the spotlight wasn't on her. The plane touched down, wheels screeching on the tarmac. Passengers collectively sighed WTIH relief. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Thomas decided the next steps in his mind. He texted his assistant, instructing them to forward certain documents to the airline's headquarters in advance of his arrival. Specifically, the lease agreement pages bearing his name as a signatory. Once at the gate, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood gathering their items from overhead bins. DeAndre took a moment to whisper a thank you to Thomas. "I really appreciate you speaking up," he said softly. "That was messed up." Thomas nodded. "You didn't deserve that. I'm sorry you went through it." He paused. "If you plan to file a complaint, I encourage you to see it through. Often these things get swept under the rug. but I think you have a strong case." DeAndre exhaled. "I will. Trust me." They both shuffled out into the aisle. Cynthia stood at the front of the cabin, bidding a robotic, "Have a nice day" to each passenger. Thomas knew that confronting her directly in that moment wouldn't do much good. It could even lead to him being escorted off the plane by security. Instead, he gave her a polite nod, which she met with the faintest sneer, her facade cracking just enough. Tut, it was obvious she still held him in contempt. The corridor leading into JFK was its usual flurry of bustle. DeAndre parted ways with Thomas, heading for the baggage claim area to see if he could get further assistance. Thomas, however, had a different destination, the airline's premium customer service lounge. Even though he wasn't flying first class, his status as a major stakeholder, if the staff bothered to look up his name, afforded him certain privileges. Normally he never used them. Today, however, was different. He slipped past the checkpoint and found a quiet corner in the lounge. A representative was waiting, alerted by Thomas's assistant that an important shareholder would be arriving and needed a private conversation. The representative, Miranda Long, a poised woman with a friendly smile, approached him. "Mr. Ellington, it's an honor to finally meet you in person. I understand you have some concerns," she said, her voice betraying a hint of worry. News traveled fast within the airline's upper ranks. Thomas nodded, his voice calm but firm. He recounted the entire incident form, Cynthia forcing him to gate-check his appropriately sized bag, to her vile act of tossing another passenger's bag into the trash. This flight attendant's behavior was completely unacceptable, Thomas said. It underscores a serious issue within our airline's customer service culture. Miranda took notes on a tablet, her face growing graver with each detail. "That's absolutely appalling," she said. "On behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for what happened to you and the other passenger. Rest assured we will investigate." Thomas eyed her carefully. He'd seen perfunctory apologies before he knew the difference between genuine concern and corporate lip service. Miranda seemed sincere, but sincerity alone wouldn't rectify the systemic issues that allowed someone like Cynthia to continue working unchecked. He decided to cut to the chase. "Miranda, I appreciate your apology, but I want to see real consequences and real change." He then referenced the documentation his assistant had sent. "If you look at the email form, my office, you'll see my position as a key signatory to the upcoming lease agreement for the Airbus A330 wide-body aircraft that your airline is banking on for long-haul expansion." Miranda blinked, then glanced at her tablet. She scrolled through the email, eyes widening. She knew the airline's immediate future hinged on renegotiating and extending certain aircraft leases at favorable rates, especially after the financial hits of recent years. Failing to secure those leases could be catastrophic. "I understand," Miranda said in a hushed tone. "You have a considerable stake in the deals we're about to finalize." Thomas nodded. "Yes, and I'm scheduled to meet some of your executives in London tomorrow. We'll be going over the final numbers for the new aircraft and possibly renegotiating older ones. As of this moment, let's just say my enthusiasm for continuing our partnership with the airline is diminishing." Miranda's composure slipped momentarily. She recognized the weight of his words. "Mr. Ellington, I assure you we take these matters very seriously. Seriously. The flight attendant in question will face disciplinary action pending a thorough investigation. And if it's determined she violated company policy or acted in a discriminatory manner, termination is on the table. We pride ourselves on an inclusive environment." Thomas nodded, satisfied. Tut, at least a serious discussion would happen. "I'm not vindictive," he said, "but I won't tolerate such behavior in a company I partially invest in. No passenger deserves that treatment." Miranda thanked him, promising to escalate his complaint immediately. Before he left for his connecting flight, Thomas told her one more thing. There was another passenger, DeAndre Milton, who was directly impacted by this. "I'd like the airline to reach out to him personally with an apology and some form of compensation. He was the real victim here." Miranda nodded with conviction. "Absolutely, sir." With a couple of hours to spare before his international flight, Thomas decided to check in on DeAndre. He found him near the baggage claim area, filing a report with a customer service agent. The agent looked overwhelmed as DeAndre recounted the story for the second time in less than an hour. "She literally threw my bag in the trash," he repeated, voice laden with frustration. Thomas approached quietly. "Hey," he said gently. DeAndre turned, relief flickering in his eyes. "Man, I'm glad you're here. I'm trying to tell them what happened, but I feel like they're brushing me off." Thomas nodded. "I just spoke to someone higher up. They're aware of the situation and are taking it seriously." DeAndre sighed, tension leaving his shoulders. "Thank you. I just hope they do something." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on DeAndre's shoulder. "Trust me, they will." As if on cue, DeAndre's phone rang. He picked up, listened, then glanced at Thomas in surprise. "Yes, I can come up," he said. After he hung up, he explained, "They want me to go to the airline lounge upstairs. Some rep wants to talk to me personally." Thomas grinned. "That's progress." The two men walked together toward the lounge. When they reached the entrance, Miranda was there, waiting with a warm, apologetic smile. She guided DeAndre into a small, private office, shutting the door behind them. Thomas decided to wait in the lounge area, giving them space for a candid discussion. Half an hour later, DeAndre emerged, looking more at ease. She apologized on behalf of the airline, he told Thomas. "They're offering to pay for the items that got damaged, plus give me a travel voucher. And she said that flight attendant is under investigation." He exhaled deeply. "I mean, it's something. But it doesn't erase what happened." Thomas nodded sympathetically. "Nothing can fully erase it, but at least they're acknowledging wrongdoing." DeAndre's face turned solemn. "Do you think it'll make a difference long term?" Thomas met his gaze. "I have a feeling it will," he said, though he didn't elaborate on his own role in ensuring that the airline underwent some serious introspection about its hiring, training, and oversight practices. That evening, Thomas boarded his flight to London. This time, he was upgraded to business class, no doubt courtesy of the airline's management, who were now keenly aware of who he was. He accepted the seat without protest, but also without joy. The events of the day weighed heavily on his mind. He reclined in the wide seat, sipping a glass of water and texting with his assistant about upcoming meetings. A flurry of emails had arrived from the airline's executive team, each more apologetic than the last. Some expressed shock at Cynthia's conduct. Others assured him it was an isolated incident. But was it truly isolated? Thomas doubted that. Where there was one openly hostile employee, there were usually more, albeit quieter, or more strategic in their expression of bias. Thomas slept fitfully, dreaming of flight attendants, snatching bags, and an entire plane filled with frightened, marginalized travelers who had nowhere to store their belongings. It was a metaphor, he supposed, for how easy it was for the powerful to remove the possessions and dignity of those they deemed Hesse. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the airline's London offices. The boardroom was sleek with glass walls overlooking the bustling city. Present were several high-ranking executives, including Christopher Hall, the airline's chief financial officer, and Linda Reyes, the vice president of fleet management. Thomas had met with them before. They knew him as a pragmatic negotiator, someone who could secure favorable terms, but also believed in fair play. Today, however, the atmosphere felt charged. They stood to greet him, offering handshakes tinged with caution, as if fearful of how the recent incident would color the entire negotiation. After a round of polite introductions, Christopher began. "Thomas, we've all heard about your unfortunate experience during Flight 407. We can't apologize enough. That behavior does not reflect our values." Thomas measured his words. "I appreciate the apology. But as you know, I'm not just a passenger. My company's involvement in leasing contracts is vital to your next phase of expansion. It's hard to reconcile the values you claim with what I witnessed on that plane." Linda leaned forward. "We've already initiated an internal investigation. Ms. Barnes has been placed on administrative leave pending a thorough review. We're committed to improving our training and oversight measures." Thomas nodded. "That's good. I would also like to see a plan for how you'll address systemic issues. Diversity and inclusion, training, more robust accountability for flight attendants who receive multiple complaints. Otherwise, I might have to reconsider future lease deals or at least incorporate stricter oversight clauses." Christopher and Linda exchanged uneasy glances. They knew losing Thomas's support would cripple their ability to expand their fleet at competitive rates. The airline's entire business model hinged on these lease extensions, especially given the industry's volatile post-pandemic climate. Linda inhaled, then spoke carefully. "We're prepared to put those measures in writing. Improved training, a clear zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, and a thorough review of our complaint handling system." Thomas leaned back, folding his arms. "It's a start. I'd also like to see real-time diversity metrics among your cabin crew and management. Is the airline consistently promoting or hiring from diverse backgrounds? Or are people like Ms. Barnes able to pass probation without thorough evaluation of their interpersonal conduct?" Christopher cleared his throat. "We can provide some of that data, but it might take time." Thomas gave a wry smile. "I'm patient, but not overly so. This is about more than just me or DeAndre Milton. It's about ensuring your entire passenger base can travel WTIH dignity. And if I'm invested in your fleet, I'm invested in your brand." The negotiation proceeded for several hours, delving into specifics, lease rates, maintenance responsibilities, training budgets. By the end, the airline agreed to incorporate new policies that Thomas stipulated. They also accepted his slightly modified lease terms, which increased the airline's financial obligations unless they met certain diversity and customer service benchmarks. When all was signed, Thomas rose from his chair. Christopher and Linda stood with him, their relief evident. But Thomas didn't let them off easy. "I hope we can look back on this and see it as a turning point," he said. Christopher nodded emphatically. "You have my word." Back in the States, Cynthia Barnes was holed up in her modest apartment. She had been called into the airline's local office the day after the flight to JFK. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Rebecca Johnson, had confronted her with the accusations made by Thomas and DeAndre. Passenger testimonials were piling up, some WTIH smartphone video snippets, capturing the moment she'd yelled at DeAndre or sneered at Thomas. The airline's HR department launched a formal inquiry. For a time, Cynthia tried to deny the allegations, claiming she was merely enforcing policy. But the videos told a different story, revealing her sneering tone and her racially charged remarks. Her words had sealed her fate. She soon received a letter by email which stated, "After a thorough investigation of the events on Flight 407, we have determined that your conduct was in clear violation of our Code of Ethics and Anti-Discrimination Policy. Your employment is hereby terminated effective immediately." Fury, shame, and panic warred within Cynthia. She paced her living room, reading the letter over and over. She raged to herself about how soft the airline had become, how passengers like Thomas and DeAndre couldn't take a bit of tough love. But deep down, she knew her actions went beyond tough love. They were abusive, steeped in prejudice. And she had been caught in the spotlight of someone far more powerful than she had ever imagined. A few days later, Thomas was in his New York office, catching up on a backlog of work after his trip to London. The airline had already publicly announced new customer service initiatives, touting them as part of their ongoing commitment to passenger well-being. The official press release did not name Thomas or highlight the embarrassing flight incident, but insiders knew the catalyst for these changes. Thomas's phone rang. The caller ID was unknown, but he picked up anyway. "Hello." A trembling voice came through. "Is this Mr. Ellington?" "Yes," Thomas replied, uncertain. "It's Cynthia Barnes," the woman said. "I tracked down your number through a friend who works for the airline." Her voice quivered with anger and desperation. "I lost my job because of you." Thomas swallowed. He hadn't expected this. "Because of me? Or because of your actions?" She fell silent for a moment. Then she spat. "You had no business interfering. I've been with that airline for 10 years. Who are you to come in and get me fired?" Thomas took a calming breath. "I'm someone who refuses to let racism go unchecked. If you believe this was a personal vendetta, you're mistaken. UO assaulted a passenger's dignity and property. Did you expect no consequences?" "You're all the same," she muttered bitterly. "You think you can wave your money around." Thomas held his ground. "Cynthia, I'm sorry you lost your job, but UO alone are responsible for your behavior. Perhaps this is an opportunity to reflect and do better." She scoffed. "Spare me the lecture. You took my livelihood. You got your revenge. Are you happy now?" Thomas paused, sympathy flickering in his chest, despite everything. "I never wanted revenge. I wanted accountability. I hope you find a path forward that helps you unlearn the bias you've shown. That's all I can say." Cynthia hung up the line, going dead. Thomas exhaled, setting the phone aside. He felt no triumphant satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that standing against injustice was the right thing to do. A week later, DeAndre Milton boarded a flight bound for his hometown in North Carolina. He carried a brand new navy blue suitcase, sleek, durable, and gifted by the airline, as part of his compensation. It wasn't about the luggage, though. For DeAndre, this trip carried symbolic weight. He was finally going home to celebrate his mother's 60th birthday, a moment he had feared would be ruined by the traumatic flight experience days earlier. Inside the new suitcase was the same watch he had carefully chosen for his mother, a modest but elegant piece with a pearl face and a handwritten note tucked beneath it. The memory of nearly losing that gift of watching a flight attendant toss his belongings like trash still stirred unease. But this time the boarding process was smooth. A gate agent greeted him with a friendly smile. The crew welcomed him aboard without hesitation. He noticed small things, the warmth in their tone, the way the attendants made eye contact, the fact that no one scrutinized his carry-on. In his upgraded seat economy plus, DeAndre settled in and exhaled slowly. It was just a 2-hour flight, but it felt like a test. Could he trust the skies again? He watched the clouds drift past the window, his mind replaying the moments Thomas Ellington had stood up for him. A stranger, a man who had nothing to gain from intervening. And yet he had. That act of quiet courage had stayed with DeAndre more than any apology or compensation. It was a reminder tart dignity wasn't something granted by gate agents or crew. It was a right, and sometimes you needed someone to help defend it. When the plane landed, DeAndre retrieved his suitcase from the overhead bin himself. No one questioned whether it belonged to him. No one touched it but him. He arrived at his childhood home just after sunset. His mother opened the door, arms wide and smile even wider. "There's my boy," she beamed. "I made it," DeAndre said, embracing her tightly. They sat in the living room, sipping sweet tea and catching up on life. Then he pulled out the small watch box and handed it to her. Her eyes widened as she opened it. Oh, baby, it's beautiful," she said, holding it up to the light. DeAndre hesitated, then shared the full story, the confrontation, the humiliation, the stranger who defended him, and the corporate fallout tart followed. His mother's expression shifted from admiration to concern, then pride. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said softly, taking his hand. "But I'm proud of how you handled it. And I'm grateful that someone stood beside you. The world needs more of that." DeAndre nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "It shook me, Mama. But it also showed me that there are people out there who won't let things slide. People who'll say something when others stay silent." She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes that's all it takes, a voice. And now you know how powerful yours is, too." Later that night, after she had gone to bed, DeAndre sat on the porch under the stars. He didn't feel angry anymore, just reflective. What had started as a degrading moment on a plane had become a turning point in his understanding of justice, courage, and community. He knew that no policy or training session could erase bias overnight. But he also knew that change was possible. One flight, one voice, one ally at a time. He looked up at the sky, a commercial plane flashing faintly in the distance, and felt a new kind of peace. The next time something wasn't right, he'd remember what Thomas did. And he'd be ready to do the same. In the months that followed, real change began to take root within the airline. Cynthia Barnes's termination had sent shock waves through the company. Not because she was missed, but because it shattered the illusion that inappropriate behavior could be ignored if it didn't make headlines. Her case became a pivotal example during staff meetings and training modules, a living reminder that no employee, no matter how experienced, was above accountability. The airline, under mounting pressure from shareholders and public scrutiny, rolled out an ambitious overhaul of its internal culture. All flight crew gate agents and customer service representatives were now required to complete quarterly diversity and anti-bias training, no exceptions. Unlike previous superficial sessions, these new programs involved immersive simulations, real case studies, and anonymous feedback forums. For the first time, voices that had once gone unheard were being acknowledged. Thomas Ellington, though not publicly tied to the reforms, continued to operate behind the scenes. His influence grew quietly but powerfully. Through private consultations with the airline's leadership Enad Financial Board, he helped establish a compliance team, tasked with monitoring discrimination complaints in real time. The team reported directly to the executive board, a move that signaled a serious commitment to change. Miranda Long stayed in close contact, providing Thomas with regular updates. "We're starting to see a shift in behavior," she said during one call. "Crew members are more mindful, and passengers are noticing." One survey reported a 27% increase in passenger satisfaction, with a significant boost among travelers of color. The memo that circulated among employees, signed by the CEO himself, read, "As part of our renewed promise to create an inclusive and dignified travel experience, we reaffirm our zero-tolerance policy toward discriminatory actions or speech. We are not just flying passengers, we are serving people, and every person deserves respect." Thomas read that memo from his office and quietly smiled. He didn't need headlines, or credit, he needed results. And now, finally, they were starting to show. Some months later, Thomas Ellington once again found himself walking through the expansive corridors of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The buzz of the concourse felt familiar: business people rushing to gates, families navigating stroller wheels and snack bags, and solo travelers nestled in corners with headphones and hopeful eyes. But today felt different. Thomas wasn't just flying for another negotiation or deal. He was headed to Los Angeles, where the airline was unveiling a brand new training and diversity center, a direct result of the very confrontation that had shifted its course. As he scanned his boarding pass and stepped onto the aircraft, he was greeted with a warm, sincere, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Ellington," from a young flight attendant. Her smile wasn't forced. Her eyes met his with genuine professionalism. A second flight attendant, a black man named Jordan, extended a hand to help with Thomas's briefcase. "We're honored to have you flying with us today," he said. Thomas raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. "Thank you," he replied. "It's good to be here." He made his way to his aisle seat in business class, an upgrade he hadn't requested but accepted. As he settled in, he noticed something subtle yet powerful. The crew's tone was respectful, but not performative. Other passengers, including elderly travelers, a young woman in a hijab and a man wearing a maintenance uniform, all received the same warm, equal treatment. No one was scanned with suspicion or overlooked because of how they looked. There was a new energy aboard, something lighter, more just. As the plane began taxiing, Thomas stared out the window, the skyline of Atlanta shimmering beneath the morning sun. He thought back to that day, how a simple bag had turned into a battleground of dignity and prejudice, and how with one voice raised in calm truth, the ripple of change had begun. Begun. His phone buzzed. A message from Miranda Long read, "Training center opens today. Press will be there. Thank you for holding us accountable for not walking away." Thomas allowed himself a small, private smile. He had never set out to become a symbol or an activist. He simply believed in fairness and in not staying silent when the line between professionalism and prejudice was crossed. As the plane lifted off, he thought about DeAndre too. About every passenger who had ever felt unseen or disrespected. He knew this one flight didn't mean the work was done. Change was ongoing and vigilance would always be necessary. But this flight, this day, felt like the beginning of something better. Thomas leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and breathed in the quiet victory of having made a difference, not with outrage, but with resolve. And there you have it, a journey that began with a single suitcase tossed carelessly into the trash, and ended with sweeping change within an entire Airline. This story isn't just about one man's silent power play or one flight attendant's downfall. It's about shining a light on the hidden biases that can lurk within any organization. It's a reminder that we all possess the power to speak up, stand firm, and demand better, no matter our seat assignment. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting tales that reveal the best and sometimes the worst of human nature. Together, let's keep raising awareness and inspiring change one story at a time. Safe travels, everyone.